There is a version of this show where Missy Cooper is the punchline, the eye roll, the kid who can't sit still in math class while her twin brother solves calculus in the bathtub. That's the surface read, and if you stopped there, you'd have missed the real story completely. Here's the sentence that should stop you cold. By the time this family is done, the genius wins a Nobel Prize, and the normal one is working a counter job at a burger chain, going through a divorce, pregnant, and still getting criticized by her own mother in her 30s. That's not a coincidence. That's not bad luck. That is the direct, traceable, receipt-by-receipt outcome of a childhood spent being systematically erased. And once you see the pattern, you cannot watch this show the same way again. Mr. Blessed here. I've gone back through this entire franchise, episode by episode, and I want to build the case properly this time. Not vibes, not fan theories, actual evidence from the show itself. Because there's a real documented psychological pattern this character maps onto almost perfectly, and once you understand the mechanics of it, every annoying thing Missy Cooper ever did suddenly makes complete sense. So let's start with the mechanism, because you need to understand this before anything else clicks into place. Attention in a household is not infinite. It's a resource, and in the Cooper house, that resource has one primary destination, Sheldon. Whether you read his traits as giftedness, autism spectrum coding, or both, the result is the same. He requires constant supervision, constant translation, constant management. Every meltdown needs diffusing. Every social misstep needs damage control. Every routine needs protecting. That's not a criticism of Sheldon. That's just math. A finite household, an infinite need, and somebody has to absorb the difference. Family researchers have a name for the sibling who absorbs it: the glass child. Not fragile, the opposite, actually. The name refers to how the parents see through them, not because they're cold people, but because their eyes are physically occupied elsewhere. The glass child learns early, often before they have language for it, that their needs are the ones that get postponed, indefinitely. And here's the part almost nobody talks about. Glass children usually look fine on paper. They're independent, they're capable, they don't complain. That's exactly what makes it invisible. The coping mechanism disguises itself as good behavior. Underneath it, the research links this pattern to anxiety, to relationship instability, to underachievement that has nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with the simple fact that nobody was in the room asking how they were doing. Keep that mechanism in your head, because we're about to watch it happen to a 9-year-old live, on camera. Early in the show, university researchers bring the twins in for a paid cognitive study, and the family only agrees because the money is tight, which tells you something about the priorities before a single test even starts. Sheldon does exactly what you'd expect. He obliterates the logic puzzles and completely face plants on anything requiring empathy or social reading. Fine. Predictable, Missy is the one who should stop you. She doesn't just pass the emotional intelligence portion, she starts reverse engineering the adults running the study. She clocks a researcher's crush on a colleague before either of them has said a word about it. She offers the woman unsolicited advice on how to get his attention. She's 9 years old and she is out profiling trained psychologists in real time. Then comes the question that should be the thesis of this entire franchise. How did you get so good at reading people? And her answer, paraphrased, is devastating in its simplicity. When you spend enough time by yourself, you start noticing things everyone else misses. A 9-year-old just told a research psychologist that her sharpest skill is a byproduct of loneliness, not a gift, a symptom. Then the researcher asks who's on her team at home, and she maps her entire family with a clarity that should terrify every adult listening. Her mother, her grandmother, and Sheldon form one orbit, bound together by his needs. Her father and her other brother form a second orbit, bound by football and traditional masculinity. And when asked who's on her team, her answer is one word: nobody. Sit with that. The parents are watching this through a monitor. They hear it. They see their daughter's face when she says it, and then nothing changes. Not that night, not that season, not ever. That's the moment Missy learns the actual lesson of her childhood. Honesty doesn't move anything. You can say the truest, saddest thing you've ever said, and the room will simply absorb it and move on. So why keep saying true things? That single scene is the blueprint for every bad decision she makes for the rest of the story. Keep it in your pocket, because we're going to need it later. Now here's where the real injustice starts, and it's something most breakdowns of this show completely skip. The difference in what kind of intelligence gets rewarded. Sheldon's intelligence is measurable. IQ scores, scholarship offers, admission to college at 11, numbers you can put on a report card and brag about at church. Missy's intelligence is unmeasurable by any school's standard. Reading a room in 2 seconds, sensing a lie before the sentence finishes, translating human behavior into terms Sheldon can process using sitcom references because that's the only language that reaches him. There's no gold star for figuring out your parents' marriage is cracking before either of them will admit it. In a household and honestly a whole era that only values what fits on paper, her entire skill set doesn't register as intelligence at all, and the labels stick. Her own mother, in front of outside company, describes her as dumb as soup in the same breath she's praising Sheldon. Her older brother later calls her a dumb teenager without a second thought. The family consensus forms early: pretty, fun, athletic, not smart. And here's the part that turns this from a sitcom quirk into an actual tragedy. Missy believes it. She internalizes it so completely that she stops trying in school entirely. It's mentioned later that it takes her 6 years to finish high school, not because she's incapable, because when the people who are supposed to know you best tell you what you are, eventually you stop fighting the label and start living inside it. Psychologists call this exact mechanism a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it is one of the cruelest mechanisms in this entire story, because nobody ever has to raise their voice to make it happen. They just have to repeat it enough times. Meanwhile, the same kid quietly builds a genuinely profitable side hustle out of a small loan from her grandmother, showing real business instinct nobody in that house is equipped to notice. Because if it isn't physics, it isn't a subject worth discussing at that dinner table. But none of this works without understanding the person actually running the show behind the scenes, and it isn't who you think. The show wants you to see Mary Cooper as the devoted, overworked, sacrificial mother holding an unconventional family together through sheer faith. And there's truth in that read. But look at how consequences are distributed in that house, and the picture changes fast. Her older son gets a girl pregnant as a teenager, outside marriage, which should be the single greatest violation of everything a devout woman like Mary believes. And the response is disappointment that fades into support within episodes. Sheldon is condescending, dismissive, and openly rude to nearly everyone he meets, including at times toward his mother's faith itself, and it's waved off every time with some version of "that's just Sheldon." But Missy uses one swear word, or talks back once, or shows completely ordinary teenage attitude, and it becomes a full disciplinary event. Same house, same mother. 3 completely different rule books. And the reason isn't complicated once you say it out loud. Mary can't control Sheldon. He's operating on a level she can't touch. She can't fully control her older son either. He's too independent by that point. Missy is the only one left who's still small enough to dominate, so the grip tightens on the one child who can least afford it. There's one scene that captures this better than any speech could. Missy gets her heart broken for the first time. A boy she liked is seen with someone else, and in a moment of pure 11-year-old helplessness, she throws something at him. Not proud of it, but understandable. She comes home wrecked and asks for exactly one thing: to be left alone in her room. Her father actually respects that. Sheldon does not. He barges in anyway, peppering her with tone-deaf questions while she's still crying, because boundaries have never been part of his operating system. Cornered in her own bedroom with nowhere left to retreat, she finally snaps and damages something of as Mary walks in. She sees a crying Sheldon and a torn keepsake. She does not ask a single question about why her daughter has been sobbing for hours. She simply takes Sheldon's side and grounds Missy on the spot. A piece of paper outweighs her daughter's first heartbreak. And Missy learns, permanently this time, that showing real emotion in that house doesn't get you comfort, it gets you punished. So she stops showing it. The door closes, and it mostly stays closed for the rest of the story. Fast forward to the season where everything collapses at once. Mary, standing in her church, implodes over her older son's scandal. Her marriage is quietly fraying, and in the middle of all that noise, Missy essentially disappears in plain sight. Still at the dinner table, still walking the halls, completely unseen. Then it happens. Her father simply forgets to pick her up from school. Not a dramatic fight, an oversight. For a kid whose deepest wound is already, "I don't register in this family," being left standing at the curb isn't an accident. It's confirmation. The same week, she's not even included when a new baby arrives in the family. Everyone rushes off in celebration, and nobody thinks to bring her along. She walks into school the next day already running on empty and snaps at a teacher, getting sent home. And when she gets home and finds her parents fully absorbed comforting Sheldon over some setback with his own plans, something finally breaks completely. She says, in essence, that she has spent her entire life watching everything orbit around her brother, that this was never about one missed pickup, that they have been forgetting she exists for years. And Mary's response is discipline, not a hug, not a single follow-up question. Because actually hearing that sentence would mean admitting she failed, and she cannot do that. That night, Missy takes her father's truck and disappears with a friend. And here's the detail that should genuinely disturb you. Her parents notice the vehicle is missing before they notice their daughter is gone. Her father assumes she's just giving him the silent treatment and doesn't even check her room. Now, plenty of viewers will say, fair. Stealing a car is a crime, not a cry for help, and that's a reasonable objection. But family systems researchers describe this exact escalation constantly. When a child cannot get attention through good behavior, when compliance is met with the same indifference as everything else, the psyche eventually flips strategy entirely. Negative attention becomes preferable to none. If quiet good behavior gets you ignored, and only chaos gets you noticed, the child will eventually create the chaos. There is exactly one moment where the show lets you believe things might turn around. A storm catches Missy and her father on the road, and they end up huddled together outdoors while it passes. Stripped of every defense she's built for years, she finally breaks down and apologizes for everything, insisting she does love her family, that she doesn't understand why she acts out the way she does. And that confusion is the whole tragedy in miniature. She has no framework to say, I have been emotionally neglected, and this is the only coping mechanism I have left. She's a young teenager who just knows something in her feels broken, and she assumes the fault is hers. That's textbook for kids in this exact situation. They blame themselves because if the problem is them, it's at least fixable. If the problem is the family, there's no fixing anything. For 30 seconds, you think this is the turning point. It isn't. Her father dies not long after, the one parent who consistently showed up for her, who took her to what she genuinely believed was the fanciest restaurant in the state, who actually asked what she wanted and waited for the answer. Gone at the exact moment she needed him most. After that, the family doesn't come together, it scatters. Her mother buries herself deeper in religion. Her genius brother escapes across the country into a life of equations. Her other brother becomes the reluctant head of the household by necessity. And Missy is left in an empty house with a mother who wants to talk about baptism logistics when her daughter needs someone who can sit with grief, jump forward to her adult life, and the wreckage is laid out plainly. She's working a counter job at a burger chain. The same kid who once ran a legitimately profitable operation out of pocket change at school, going through a rough divorce, pregnant again, visibly unhappy. She shows up to her brother's wedding and watches him marry well, win a Nobel Prize, and build the life that never once got discussed for her. Every dollar and every conversation in that house went toward his future. Hers was never on the agenda, never funded, never even imagined out loud. And even years later, her mother is still finding ways to criticize her, still treating her like an unfinished project instead of a daughter she failed to see. But here's the twist almost nobody catches, and it's the one that actually recontextualizes the entire story. The person whose existence caused her erasure in the first place is also the only member of that family who consistently gives her real, unprompted recognition. Sheldon goes to her for social advice constantly and treats her read on people as genuine expertise, something no one else in that house ever validates. When she tries to run off as a kid, he's the one who follows her so she isn't out there alone. When she locks herself away, he's the one standing outside the door. And later, at the single biggest moment of his academic life, he dedicates his graduation speech to her. Not their mother, not their father. Her. That's the cruelest irony in the whole franchise. The most genuine acknowledgement Missy ever receives doesn't come from the parent who owed her unconditional attention her entire life. It comes from the sibling whose capacity for empathy is, by the show's own framing, the most limited in the family. She spent years functioning as the emotional infrastructure holding that household together, and the only real return on that investment came from the one person least equipped to give it. There's a small mercy at the very end. We're told she eventually finds a partner who actually sees her and builds the kind of family she never had growing up. That's real, and it matters. But it doesn't erase dumb as soup. It doesn't erase a mother stepping over her daughter's first heartbreak to comfort a torn photograph. It doesn't erase a 9-year-old telling a stranger, on record, that her team is nobody. Just her, Missy Cooper, was never the slow twin. She was never the background character. She was the most emotionally intelligent person in a house that only had one working definition of intelligence, and that house spent over a decade proving her wrong about her own worth, one small dismissal at a time. And that's really the uncomfortable question this whole character forces you to sit with. Not was Missy annoying, but what happens to the kid nobody thinks needs checking on? Because the show never frames her as the one in crisis. She's not the genius. She's not the screw-up who needs an intervention. She's the fine one. And that's exactly the problem. Fine is the label every glass child gets stuck with, right up until the moment they stop being fine in a way loud enough for someone to finally notice. By then, the damage isn't a phase anymore. It's a personality. So here's what I actually want to know from you. Was Mary Cooper the real antagonist of this entire show? Or just an ordinary mother who got overwhelmed and made the wrong calls under pressure? Put your answer in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you want more breakdowns like this that make you rewatch your favorite shows completely differently, subscribe because there's a lot more where this came from.